This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
I have a motion to approve the 3/12/24 minutes that were drafted and submitted by Leslie yesterday.
So moved. Second.
One vote on them if you weren't there. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Second. Public speak.
Leslie's not here, so we have to pick a secretary.
Have a secondary secretary.
I have no idea how to do any of that.
Do you want to just give an instruction? She knows.
The other thing to remember is, and we did this for council committees, take minor notes, but then look at the video if you want to get detail. So just get broad notes. Public speak, is there any?
Point of order.
Yes.
At the beginning of the meeting, should we not have identified ourselves in terms of who we are? Or just a
I've
roll
never
call?
done that before.
Just a roll call.
It's an accessibility thing we do at the Council on Aging Board.
Oh, okay. So let's have a call for identification. Dan Rist.
Joe Banis. Tom Brown.
Cynthia Terrell, COA Director.
Crystal Potestos, Andre Chamora, Sandy Eddy.
Chuck Connor.
Pat Bruff.
Technically, open meeting means we should have done a roll call vote because Pat's online. So from now on, we will do roll call votes. Public speak, anyone who doesn't have any public online? So we don't need to do public speak. Old business. Updates. So I assume, Cindy, you put this here for each of the committees to talk.
Okay,
So
with
I
your
am.
permission, could I
Yes,
facilitate that section?
You go.
Okay, all right. Hi, everybody. So we are going to talk about, and I'm just in the minutes instead of the agenda. Let me get to the agenda so that I can, say, all right, you can just do that. Like you can cue me. Okay. So the point of this agenda item is for each committee to report out on what they've done so far, what they need from the larger committee to keep doing their work, which could simply be, asking questions of the group, getting input, retooling your direction, whatever you need right now. And then what do you need coming up soon so that we can get you the resources that you need to get to the point where you're actually going to make your final report in the fall to the committee, or maybe you make your report sooner because your work is briefer and everybody else's work hinges on what you're doing. So that's what we're going to be figuring out here with each committee's turn. And if you need to hear from another committee first to know what to do next, that's understandable. So, okay, so let's start with site selection. Who's reporting out from that committee?
I will. We have not met formally, Pat and Chuck and I, but I have sketched out some potential sites just for my own awareness of what's around town. Cindy, I think you told me earlier that that a perfect site might require like 4 acres. That seemed a bit large, but I don't know for sure. I know I had said to you that when we did our visits last year, the senior center that I personally fell in love with was Ludlow. And I don't know if you reached out to that director or not, but I thought you got back to me and said 4 acres.
I think it's 4.3 something acres.
That just seems kind of large, but anyway, we're looking at potential sites that large. It can always be smaller. The sites that I sort of just penned out on my own without getting into it, unfortunately, are all private, which means it would require a purchase. But I've said all along that if we're building a $15 or $16 million senior center, if you had to add $1 million because you had to acquire the land, that's not a big number, especially if it's spread out over 20 years. It's a small number compared to the overall gross number of construction. So the part I haven't gotten into yet, or we haven't gotten into yet, is the potential for looking at city-owned property. And the planning department is who I want to work with, and they've been in a little bit of state of flux. Any day now, we should hear about a new planner being hired. So I will work with that person closely on identifying potential municipal sites that we wouldn't have to buy. Personally, I don't see anything in an immediate radius to downtown that is owned by the city that would work. I can identify for you the 3 sites that I've come up with that privately owned. However, I would caution that the owner has not been approached. We don't even know if they're for sale, but we would have to approach and just say, is this parcel for sale and how much?
So Tom, then let's not name any sites right now.
Perfect.
What does
I love
your
that.
committee need to do next to meet and discuss?
Identify those city sites, which we can do before the next meeting, I think. When's the next meeting?
14th.
May 14th. Okay. We should be able to meet with the city planner before then to identify potential municipal sites, and then hopefully add to the list of private sites that might work. Come up with a larger number than 3, obviously. When I looked at the report you submitted from Wilbraham, they had like a dozen sites on there that they had initially chosen. My only question then is, do we come back to this full group to sort of rank them? What's your preferred? So if we have 5 or 6 sites we come up with, would you rank them in order of preference so that we don't go approaching a private owner and they say, sure, I'll sell this to you for this amount, and we sort of get on their radar screen and what have you, and then we find out, oh, wait a minute, that wouldn't be our first choice. We'd rather be over here. So if we can come back to you with that list at the next meeting, maybe this group can rank them in some sort of order of preference.
Tom, so maybe your subcommittee first could talk about the criteria for a good site for a senior center in Easthampton. Because jumping right to ranking when no one knows what would make an actual good topographical site, geographical site, and so those other the characteristics that would make it a good site, we haven't even had that conversation, but
Yeah, that's
Does
my
anybody
opinion too.
else?
That'd be a little premature, so maybe we just have a list of sites
What would be premature?
to
Rank.
rank them and so on. We're not anywhere close to
I guess we
purchasing a site, right?
Right. I guess, but I would hope my own personal hope would be that by the conclusion of our work in the fall, that we might have a parcel on the hook. So when this goes to the full-fledged building committee, there's a parcel identified and maybe a handshake agreement. So that otherwise, they might as well do all this work. Because if we haven't gotten to first base, we haven't done much for the next committee. I understand what you're saying, Chuck, about ranking them. My identification of a site was open space, because we don't want to refurbish an existing building, and something in close proximity to a certain
Public transportation.
public transportation, what's the word I want? A radius around this. So do you want to go 2, 3, 4, 5 miles around the center of Easthampton, or do you want to restrict it? So the 3 sites I've identified so far, I would say are definitely on public transit and definitely within a reasonable radius of downtown and open space. Otherwise, it would be new construction. Probably never been a building. Well, no, not one of them, but what have you. So my only criteria was proximity to downtown and open space.
So I have a question. So you said that your favorite center that we visited was Ludlow. I don't believe that Ludlow really meets the proximity because it's not, I mean, it's public transportation, but it's not really within like the Main Street area. It's probably a couple blocks away from the old senior center. So I just want to be able to expand our thinking to the point of like, if we had to go outside of the center of town, could we, would we? And I think that eliminating that as a criteria is gonna kind of box us in.
I think, Crystal, my reasoning for Ludlow being my favorite
Mhm.
was the building and what goes on inside the four walls,
Okay.
not necessarily location.
Okay.
Because it was a bit away. It was drivable to downtown, but I'm looking at the facility and the way they laid it out. The visit we had there, looking at their various facilities, that was my favorite. Size, layout, what have you. Forget about where it is in reference to downtown.
Would you want to sacrifice what you love about it based on location? In my opinion, I would say no. I would rather have that building than have it in downtown.
Right, so in other words, don't restrict it to close to downtown.
May I say that the committee should discuss these parameters and prioritize them first?
Yes.
The idea of whether it should be within a couple mile radius of downtown, or can it be anywhere? Now, public transportation seems to be an exact thing because not everybody has a car. And the other thing is prioritize land.
Mhm.
We did our site visits, and one of the biggest things is parking, so you have to have acreage for that. And secondly, location is really dependent on public transportation and how easy is it to get to? And is it best that it be walkable for the people that live in town? And I say that because we're building free affordable housing centers in the 3 schools, which are close to downtown. So just so that your committee considers walkability as possibly one of the things you want to put down, not just public transportation. So I think your committee should set forth the priorities that you want to look at, and then every site that you think of, how you rank them according to those. You give them points depending on how they match those priorities.
Yeah, I think for this particular phase of this project, the tail's gonna wag the dog, meaning it's not like we have a plethora of sites to pick from. So it's not gonna be, we want it walkable, we want it on a bus route, we want this, that just may not work. The other thing I looked at, Dan, and you bring up a good point, I wasn't looking at the future, looking at the present. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe very few people walk to the senior center today. Most people drive to the senior center today.
Which is,
So
where do they park?
Big E's, Walgreens, and our limited parking. So very few people walk today to the senior center. So I think walkability might be a little bit overrated,
Well, that's what you're going to decide. I'm not saying you should.
but I don't know about you're right, the impact of
You should be having this conversation with your committee. That's all I'm saying.
Who else is on your committee?
Chuck and Pat.
Sandy, you had a question a
Well, I
little
was just
while.
curious to know, I know why can't we talk about the places that you're kind of thinking of? Is this something that shouldn't be out there, or, I mean, you said you knew about 5.
3.
I could answer that.
Okay.
I'm saying as chair of the committee, not to talk about it yet because it's out of sequence with, as Dan was saying, co-chair over there. It's out of sequence because there's no criteria developed yet officially in terms of this ad hoc committee of what we want to see in a site. And that's step 1. Then you can evaluate which sites meet that, just like 25% they meet it on this one, 50%, 100% they meet it on this, because otherwise we're going to go round and round like this when we all start talking about the sites. You know what I mean?
So
The other thing is, you mentioned they're private, they're not public land. Do we want to get out that we're looking at your property
Right.
when you haven't set priorities? And this is a public meeting, so
Right.
I don't know. That's one thing you should discuss. That's a public meeting too, your subcommittee, but it's not necessarily what do you call, recorded and everything, but you just want to be very careful about that, I would think. Not that we can't mention
Yeah,
it,
because
but
we might have a real estate agent that buys it and then tries to sell it to us for $1 million.
Thought is, we don't want to bog down the whole board meeting. Let's get our committee work done.
yeah,
Why have a committee if we're gonna?
Well, the only thing I want to add is I only have those two criteria. Who has more? Proximity to downtown, public transportation. I will add site development, meaning we don't want something that's on a cliff or something that's going to require $1 million of site work. A nice flat piece of land would be nice.
And then we do a,
Oh, I'm sorry.
we do a fair amount of transportation, and if we were at the Southampton end of town, our transportation would be significantly different in terms of how much we could do, especially where a lot of it's going to Northampton and to medical appointments, where we are, we can get to almost anyone in 15 minutes and to Northampton. And that's not a deal breaker. It's just something I think to be aware of when we're thinking about where we're putting it, thinking about how long it takes to get to any end of town or out of town.
That's right. Pat and I and Chuck will meet over coffee rather than alcohol and have a discussion at this.
Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, if there's a building on the property, why not
You could tear it down.
tear it down?
Right. I didn't look at that as a criteria to walk away from a site, to limit a site. If there's a building on it, we could definitely demolish it and go from there. But when it comes to site selection, the flatter the better, the less excavation work that has to be done, the better.
It's already on a PVTA route, high five.
But from following PVTA buses around town, they stop anywhere.
Yeah.
So
You guys want me to call on you instead of just Joe?
What you said, in terms of selection criteria, all other things being equal, a flat site would be preferable, but you have to consider that all other things being equal.
Yes.
And just to go back to Crystal's point, you may have these 3 or 4 criteria, but may have to abandon them for the sake of getting a senior center. So if we say, let's just say we set, for an example, a criteria that has to be in a 1 mile radius of downtown, and we come up with Zippo in that radius. Does it mean we'd go to 5? Sure. We're not going to eliminate the good in favor of the perfect. So.
Anybody else on this one?
Go
ahead, Steve.
So just to sum up, before the next committee meets, they'll have the minutes from this meeting where we voiced some of the criteria. Hopefully Crystal got down those, and at least we can give you those. And they're just things to consider. And thank you, Tom, for all the research you already did.
So just to reiterate, to make sure I have it right, because this is my first time taking minutes, I have open space, public transportation, walkability versus transportation availability. Was there anything else?
Flat, open
Site work.
land.
Just call it site work, I guess.
Flat
Right.
Open space.
And then the issue of, is there a tear down? Or like in Ludlow's case, they had to cut down a forest.
We got a lot of trouble. There's not many forests in Easthampton.
Let's not call it
Built them all already.
Was it really a
trees.
forest
It was
or
trees.
just a few
It was a
trees?
Clearing a lot.
wooded lot.
They cleared the lot.
It was a wooded lot. And then another aspect of Ludlow
Dog park.
that was stated, which might come up in Dan's committee's report, is that it's next to senior housing. So we had talked at the board about, if it can't be right downtown, should we at least try to locate it near housing? But we haven't said whether that's a criteria or not here.
I have a great idea, but I'm going to talk to you about it after.
Do you want to move us to the next committee?
It's me.
It's you. Okay. Well, since you're reporting out, I'll field the questions.
Center visits. Well, first of all, I have not had the luxury of being on the COA board or anything and seeing Ludlow. I didn't even know if it was, Tom obviously loves it, so we should visit it. But now that I have seen, we saw South Hadley And Hadley, I had this vision of going to a lot of different places, but it didn't work out. We have time. But Sandy and Leslie and I went to these two spaces, and I have to tell you, seeing what they have, knowing what we don't have, we have to do this. They have gorgeous facilities. Hadley, its scale is smaller, but its details, brilliant. And we have to hire the woman who was in charge of that building committee.
Yeah.
No, Jane was brilliant.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right,
Right
Sandy?
on.
She was brilliant. If you go online, I think Leslie shared her report, which is incredibly detailed for each of them.
I have South Hadley if any,
Well, you could share it. I just want to go through a little bit of the things that are in there that really impressed me. Well, number one, both sites didn't have to pay for the land. They were built from elementary schools, etc. Hadley, in fact, had to move from an elementary school, and they had a deal, and it's a campus with a public library. It's beautiful. South Hadley had cost. The cost was one thing we asked, because South Hadley was 11 million, and I think Hadley was 9 million. We want to visit those sites that were more recently constructed, so to give us a sense of how much more inflationary wise we should add to it. If we were to build a South Hadley, and to be honest with you, to me, it's my gold standard. I have to see Ludlow, I have to see others. But South Hadley, one floor, no elevators, too much money and unnecessary. It had so much programmable space. Maybe it lacked as much storage as Hadley, but we learned the details of what these spaces needed. And that's why Hadley was so good. We
oh,
learned
yeah.
a lot about it. She was so impressed with the amount of storage she had in every room. She didn't have a lot of rooms, but that to me was very important. How recent was their construction, and what did they have to go through to get it? They did overrides and et cetera. But if South Hadley was 11 million then, and we were to build 5 years from now, we're up to 15, maybe $18 million. But it's worth it if you see what it is. And they had the one thing, something you should all know is she was very important to tell us that they get a lot of people who don't live in South Hadley. Easthampton going there because it has facility. That's why they don't have enough parking. And I thought they had a lot of parking. We had to park on the street.
It was 80 something spots.
Yeah.
You're all filled, totally filled, and all the way down the street.
I think the thing also that we need to look at is, like, South Hadley has a population size of city very much similar to ours. Hadley has a very small senior population. So the scale of their building is perfect for them because they don't need the space. But the details, the curtains that were electric, the hearing aid capability in every room, and storage, she kept saying it, a big closet in every room, very important. And a single floor was very important for both of them because elevators cost money and it's more difficult to navigate. So in any case, we learned right now, if we were to sit down and suddenly design the building right now, from Hadley and South Hadley, I think we could.
Oh, yeah.
Easily. But I want to go to Wilbraham, and I need your advice. Ludlow was recently built?
Yeah.
Ludlow, Long Meadow,
Holyoke.
Long Meadow,
Holyoke.
no, I have to say no to that. Why? Because Holyoke and Chicopee were mentioned, but they're huge populations. I don't think, I want to do comparative places. Unless the committees, this
I
group
think from an
wants me to.
architecture standpoint, you need to visit Holyoke.
Well, we'll see. I want to get to the ones that are most recently built, and secondly, that have a population fairly similar to ours or less. That's why Hadley was pretty important. Anyway, Ludlow, Wilbraham, Long Meadow, and I have to say, one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is we're going to be delayed a little bit because I'm going to have surgery and I won't be able to drive for a couple of weeks.
Put you on a PBTA bus.
Well, we might have Sandy drive.
That's fine, that's fine.
And then Dan, so there's also been a request from a couple people to visit places like Upton where they've done the combo thing. So not just same campus, but same building for community center, senior center, library. And how did that process go and what did they end up with? And I'm happy, to do some of that myself.
What about Mashpee?
I have to tell you,
Mashpee, man.
Mashpee.
If you're gonna do it, Cindy, you might as well go to the Cape.
Right.
I could tell you that one thing. Remember Jane? She said, no way, they didn't want that. They
Yeah.
wanted to be senior only.
Right.
And I'm convinced that that's a mistake, putting them all in the same building. A campus, like Kathy had, oops, sorry about that, would be great, where they have a library, they have I forget what else was on that area,
Veterans.
but veterans, everything on one campus, a community center next door to the senior center, that'd be fine. But I think we should concentrate on a senior center for seniors. That's just my opinion. Again, I don't know how many sites we'll visit. I don't think we're gonna visit any for May 14th unless you guys go,
Yeah, we'll see.
because Leslie is so very detailed in her writing, so it'd be fine with me.
Dan, do you think we could close this committee and move on to the other two? Because we're at 12:30.
Oh, okay, sure.
What do you think? Is there anything else you want to say?
Well, Joe had his hand up first, but I thought it would be open for at least a limited number of questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
Comments. First of all, when you're looking at population, make sure you're looking at senior population, not just the total population of the community. We're probably not unlike a lot of other communities, but Easthampton's senior population is going to explode in the next few years. So we want to make sure we're looking at the senior population.
I brought that up because it correlates to square footage
Okay,
in the size of the building.
okay.
South Hadley's square footage is much bigger than Hadley's. And they made a point of saying, well, we have a lot more seniors.
Right.
There was like 100 people in that one program that morning. in South Hadley.
Exercise class, yeah, I read that. I was
The other
like,
one real
yeah.
quick, Joe, is when we made some visits a year ago for maybe a different reason, maybe the same reason. There are pros and cons to an elevator or one floor. And the cons to one floor are you're much more spread out. And for some seniors, you have mobility issues where the elevator can have you more condensed and easier access to get to. That's all. There's pros and cons to elevator or not an elevator.
But you'd be surprised. Oh, I'm sorry. still
Let me
have-
get Joe, then I get Sandy.
Because that was one of the things that came out from the first group of site visits, that they mentioned an architect who specializes in senior housing. And they said the pros and cons about one floor versus two floors, where one floor, all other things being equal, one floor, things are much more spread out and more seniors have to walk maybe a little bit farther. Whereas, with two floors, you might be able to get by with an even smaller piece of land, but you're going up, so you've got the elevator or the stair costs or that.
And potentially, I don't know construction, but potentially the cost of the elevator is offset by the footprint of the building. So sometimes it's more expensive to go out than it is to have an elevator and go up because you're going up on an existing footprint.
They didn't mention that South Hadley is the big footprint. They didn't mention, Sandy, any difficulty with how big it was with regard to the seniors. So anyway, Joe.
And then Dawn.
That's
Sandy's next.
I really am for the one floor, being a senior citizen. Believe me, everything is, when it's planned out by the architect or whoever, it's not that far. It's every little spot, there's a place for something else to happen. It's not really a long walk to anything.
Yeah.
And I think with elevators breaking down off and on,
Right.
and I wouldn't want to rely on an elevator.
Yeah, there's pros and cons.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, our elevator contract is like $600 a month, and that just is if everything's working well. And whenever we call them, it's like 3 times the
The
fee.
elevator
yeah.
and the
At the elevator that I have at Christopher Heights, the monthly, just having a contract with them is like $600.
costs.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, we went to South Hadley a year ago. We also went to Westfield, and I think the difference is South Hadley is like circular around a center space. Westfield is arms sticking out. So if you're one floor, arms sticking out, the veterans were like way at the end of one hall. So they had said this is way too spread out. And I think some of that goes to your point,
South
Sandy,
Hadley.
of design, where if it's around a center and you're going different ways, you don't necessarily have to go all the way from one to the other. So that it's something to think about, but I think you're right. The one you saw was a good example of limiting the walking for one floor.
Well, Cynthia wants to go on. Just let me go over a couple of the sites that you're talking about. Just write them down. Ludlow, Wilbraham.
Oh,
Long
Long Meadow,
Long Meadow that were recently constructed.
Long Meadow recent,
And not too much bigger, like Holyoke and South Hadley, I put them at the bottom, Holyoke and Chicopee at the bottom of my list. But like, I want to get to the other ones first. If we got those three, we would have 5, and that's a lot.
Yeah. Holyoke is a good representation of using an elevator, having a really great space for dining, because they have a program that's actually for dining that's funded through the school system. So the senior center doesn't pay for staffing or anything. And it also has an outside area that you can go to for activities. And I just like the fact that the staff have their own section where it's right off of the reception, but it's behind it, so that you don't, because I know in Westfield, they have a problem with the staff offices being open for the hallway. So you could be meeting with Mary Smith while Joan is at your door, knocking on your door, looking in your window, because you're right off of the hallway. So I think things like that are important to take into consideration.
I'll put it on.
And the only danger with you going along Meadow is to have indoor pickleball courts.
Yeah.
Because I know you like pickleball.
Back when I had legs.
Indoor pickleball courts.
Building, you want to go on?
Yeah.
yes, but just also one point of clarification, as you're going around, ask, is it a full kitchen or is it a catering kitchen? So South Hadley has a catering kitchen. It's not like Long Meadow where they can actually produce their own food. So just to double check.
Hadley had a kitchen that they can cook in, but again, they have smaller populations.
And they
And they made a point of saying, they don't rent it out, right? They didn't want too many groups using the space, because that meant more maintenance. Building program,
Okay,
envisioning process.
Crystal's gonna report out on that.
Okay, so we met via Zoom and we discussed wanting to put together a survey. So we looked at the surveys that had already been done by the senior center. Don had done one for activities for existing participants. And after having the discussion and looking at the different tools that we can use for surveys, we actually decided that we want to scale it down and not have this ad hoc committee do the survey for people who are all 5,000 seniors that are living in Easthampton, because that's more of what the regular building committee will be doing as a next step. What we want to do is we want to survey and get video testimonials of our current population, the people who are currently using the senior center, the people that want to use it, but maybe they're not using it. Why? What do you currently love about it? What would you improve and why? Where do you see these problems? Because we think that by getting buy-in from our current constituents, our current population, it will help to drive forward the project, but it will also help to show what do people use the senior center for? Why do they like it? And it might actually drum up people in the community who are not using the senior center, but then want to become a part of this next step with our actual building committee. So we want to have people sign up to be part of this email listserv that we're then going to send a shortened survey to about programming and set up a day with Easthampton Media to do these recorded testimonials by our current participants, so that we can this survey is going to be showing you what we currently offer, what they currently enjoy, what they currently want. Why is it a problem, our current building? Well, we have information from 1998 from UMass. We also have information that was just done a few years ago that tells you what our problems are. But now, Sandy, you can tell us what you love and what you don't like from your perspective of speaking to either me or another volunteer. You're not going to be speaking to either one of these people who work at the senior center. You're going to be talking to a volunteer who you can speak candidly with. And that what we'll do is when we do these recorded testimonials, we're going to work with Easthampton Media to kind of put a YouTube together that we can then use to advertise when we are going to go forward with the survey, so we can get the most people that are representative of our goal, which is building a new senior center, and find out from them, what they like, what they don't like, what we need to do, as far as that perspective. And then the visioning committee, they can use the information that we get. And we also thought about maybe doing like press releases to let people know that we want your opinion. If you want to be a part of this survey, please call the senior center and have your email and contact information put on a list. We are going to use the My Senior Center survey to do like robocalls for people who don't have email and ask them, if you want to participate in this survey, this is how you do it. So to get the information out more from like a marketing perspective, to be able to drum up excitement so that we're getting our constituents to tell us what they want, our current users to tell us why they can't use what we currently have and why it's important. Because we think that getting this, the driving force behind the senior center programs and events will then help to kind of make everything more concrete because people will be vested. So
Can I chime in?
absolutely.
So this will also save us money at this stage. We won't have to spend administrative time managing contracts with, facilitators and, needs assessment consultant that the building committee is just going to have to do anyway. For example, I'm on the library project committee, and that consultant just produced a 100-page report. And that's what the building committee is going to have to do. And we don't want to duplicate their work is what we've realized. So while this group had a great idea to have a community visioning session, it's we realize it's out of sequence with what an ad hoc committee should really be doing. That our job is to look at what is this Council on Aging's mission in the city of Easthampton? How are we meeting that mission or not, and why? And then how does that relate to the building project? And that we can do with our current stakeholders.
So I would totally agree with that. When we had talked in the beginning about what are the steps that we would take to get from where we are today to a new senior center, part of that early on was a visioning process, but that was when we were looking at a building committee. This ad hoc committee was a new twist, if you will, that the mayor threw out, that we would do some legwork for the full committee. So we in effect then would be saying that visioning process with a paid professional facilitator would not be part of this group's work, but part of the full-fledged building committee.
I just want to chime in. That's extremely ambitious. I'm assuming, and I love your enthusiasm, but from a practical point of view, you're giving yourself a couple of months to do all this. This would be the end result of your committee's work.
We had
All of the Easthampton media and testimonials. I mean, it's a lot.
we were going to work with Easthampton Media to schedule days, and we are going to ask people to volunteer, but we're also going to select participants based on those that have a vested interest in the success of the new senior center, like Sandy. So we're picking people, whether that seems biased or not, but we're picking people who we know have a vested interest based on current participants. But then we're also giving the opportunity to those who may not currently be vested, but want to be vested.
Just give yourself some time.
Yeah.
And so if I hear you correctly, this is in place of a facilitator.
Oh, in addition to.
In addition
No,
to-
this would mean that this, so what this is what So there would be a brief survey and that brief survey would go out through the established channels and using the established technology we already have. So we would use Google Form, which we already have. We have 1,000-person email mailing list, plus the emails of the people who don't want to be on the mailing list, but might respond to the survey. And then we have the phone numbers of the people. We can sort and have the phone numbers of the people who don't have emails and send them a robocall. And so it would be a very brief survey. That survey, if you do it in Google Forms, spits out into a spreadsheet. One of us can make some charts from that spreadsheet. Very simple, not if this, then this, the more complex level of surveying. So that would be achievable. What's not achievable is what we discussed with the visioning process committee. Not achievable right now is the figuring out what your sample, more complex sampling, figuring out if this question, if you answered this way, then this, and having complex research queries, having 6,000 people 55 and up answer a survey and having to grapple with that data and input that much data. We're
That's the
talking
facility.
smaller scale, much smaller
It's a
scale.
smaller scale, so we're still doing a facility.
For the,
Yes,
in
for
the,
the
in
building
the full
project.
building committee.
For the
Not
building,
us.
so in other words, for the,
We're an ad hoc
well,
committee.
what I'm saying, well, this is the proposal from this committee. The proposal from the committee that's looking at what should the program of a new senior center be based on the needs and wants that are going unmet or met right now. The proposal from this committee is, since the building committee is going to have that big community visioning process anyway, it's going to have the contractor to do all that work. It's going to be the big project.
I like this much better.
That we wouldn't be hiring a facilitator. Also, we don't even know if we can get a special appropriation from free cash to even do it within the
I
confines of
think
this
this
time
is a
period.
better plan, especially if the building committee is gonna have to do it anyway.
Right.
They're just duplicating work.
Right.
So this is great, and we don't have to look for free cash.
Right. And then the last part of this is then what would the fourth committee do, which has 3 extremely skilled people on it. So Kathy Schweitzer, Stella Chan, and Joe Banis. What exactly do we want them to do? Our proposal, can you say what we want them to do?
So our proposal is to ask these volunteers to help do the surveys with people as far as talking to them about meeting with Easthampton media. So Sandy goes in and she meets with Chuck, who participates in his exercise class every morning at 10 a.m. and then comes back at 1 p.m. for yoga. Well, what do you like about the senior center? I love my exercise class. I love yoga. Well, what would you like to improve? I would love there to be a space where I can sit down and have my lunch between 11 and 12:30 before I go into yoga. So that's the type of information that we want the visioning volunteers to do, because once we can condense that, and it's like providing evidence as to why we need to move forward in this direction, which is what the ad hoc committee is doing. We are providing the push to get this through,
And
to get the building committee.
And the reason why we would divide up the work in this way is because you've got 3 employed staff people here who can design the survey and design the questions. And then we could step back and the committee of really highly skilled retired folks could take the tool and with our help to implement it, and I can help pave the way, can be in charge of.
Determined to get this.
Don't happen at this point, 'cause you'd have to talk
skilled.
more.
Yeah, I mean, we can,
Highly skilled, but
Would
not
all,
for
but
much longer.
but could also work on the marketing piece. So I could see that committee, as some of the results come in, doing a rough draft of a press release that then the mayor's office and I would also work on to tell the story and to do the marketing piece is what we were thinking, rather than you having to oversee a giant community visioning session that would be duplicative, which was the original sort of mission of that group. But so that concludes what our group came to. Does anybody have questions for our group before we move on?
So we're gonna help as well. So it's not like we're gonna just hand it over. Like we were thinking of planning with Easthampton Media to have, a day where people can sign up for 15-minute interview sessions. And we're gonna be a part of the interviewing as well. But we thought our consumers would be more confident in being candid with their answers if they were speaking to other people that were not, say, the executive director and the activities director, because nobody wants to hurt their feelings. Whereas they might be candid with their responses, or they may be candid with their responses. I mean, they don't know me from a hole in the wall, so I'm sure they'll be candid as well.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I think all along, the goal of this group has been to do a lot of this legwork that we can hand off to the full-fledged building committee when they're appointed by the city council to get a running start, because we've done a lot of the legwork. I agree with you. There are things that that building committee's going to want to do, i.e. a visioning process, maybe a couple of other things, but that's the one that costs money. But if that's the case, if we do move forward that way, then I would suggest we remove that phrase visioning process, so no one thinks that, why haven't you done that yet, kind of thing.
So to sum up, we will develop that short survey. Our goal is to get it into the June newsletter. And we will also develop the interview questions, and I will work on a contract with Easthampton Media.
I enjoyed working one-on-one with people, so if that's anything I can help with, interviewing and all that. I enjoy doing that.
I'm just wondering too, if the visioning committee has ideas about that and would want to talk about sort of what we proposed and come back to us. I think we were thinking these are some good next steps, but we're trying to figure out how to combine. So I think it would be fair for you all to be able to meet and talk about what makes sense to you, and then have a discussion about that, as opposed to just like, I just want to
meet together.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
Okay.
So do we want to go on?
Yes.
Format a final report.
Oh, wait, we didn't talk about the visioning committee did meet, so they haven't
Oh, I
spoken
thought
yet.
we were just talking about it. My mistake.
Sorry.
Why do we need a visioning committee?
Right.
Everybody else has vision, so
I think,
why should we duplicate it?
Yeah.
I think building, program and visioning committee,
Mhm.
period. One committee.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because they're the volunteers
Yeah.
and your staff, so.
Yeah.
You really don't count. It's their committee. You
Right.
get your information and put together their own report.
Right.
And they're going to be more unbiased we're giving them the information, but they're looking at it just from the informational standpoint. Whereas these two have emotional kind of investment. So, I think from an emotional investment standpoint, you can be biased sometimes in your interpretation of data. So that's why I think having the volunteers be the ones that are getting that is valid.
Okay.
I think part of my understanding of this committee is that we are trying to, like, we've talked about a need for a senior center. We're trying to explore and show there really is a need, and that's beyond like the staff saying there's a need. And so I think that helps too, because Cindy and I can say these are our needs, but if the public is also saying, the users are also saying these are the needs, I think that is helpful to a building committee. So.
Anybody else on this?
Just the last thing I would say, because I'm in that committee, the other committee, the fourth committee. And when we met, what happened was that we very quickly got into, the conversation of, if money was no object, what would you want in a senior center? Which is a wonderful, wonderful question. And we could do a lot around it. But it could be that question is more for the building committee, just to be clear, and that our question is still way back on what is our mission and are we implementing it or not in the view of the people who use the senior center, if that makes sense. Because I didn't realize that, Joe, until I stepped back from the meeting we had and thought about it more from that. All right. Okay. All right.
Format a final report. Who's doing that report? All the committee, or is there a committee that's doing that? I find the Wilbraham report lacking. Doesn't have the information that we just all talked about. So I think you need to do a table of contents, a draft table of contents. What do we want to talk about in that report? The study that was done, center visits, what did they bring up? I mean, all of this needs to be discussed in that report. So I think if you put together yourself a table of contents, an index of what should be talked about in this report, then all of us contribute.
So I just have a sample. I don't know if you want to have a look at it. This is from Newton, who just did their groundbreaking. If you want to look at it, and you can use your finger, but that's, so Newton just did their groundbreaking. That was done in 2018. So that just shows right now we're in 2024. They started doing their visioning with their architect in 2018, and they just broke ground. So, and those are all the things that they came up with as an actual building committee. So we're ad hoc. So I feel like anything that they have that we can get started on, like I said, we can just transition right over to the building committee.
Do you mean as a,
Go ahead.
do you mean as a, we could use their table of contents and kind of flesh it out?
Right. I'm just, I mean,
Yeah.
if it's why recreate the wheel if there's a sample already
That's a
here.
building committee report.
This is a building committee report. Yep.
Our report doesn't necessarily have to
Yes.
be that. I don't think it needs to be a large report. Like the Wilbraham report is good in its scale. But on the other hand, let's make sure the things that Tom talked about, the parameters of his committee, what we liked about the centers we visited, your survey, and the visioning, those things have to be in there because that's what this committee is broken down.
I think the other thing we have to be cognizant of is that all of this would be, the data is the data, you can't change that. However, some recommendations that we make, for example, site, could be looked at by a future building committee and say, no, you don't like that site. We think there's a better one. And maybe they come up with a better one. I don't know. So it doesn't mean that a future building committee is going to take our recommendations and rubber stamp them and put them through.
Yep.
So we have to be a little bit thick-skinned with that if they decide to throw out a recommendation or two and create a new one. That's okay. We did our work.
Question. I could imagine maybe Kathy, Joe, and Leslie being good candidates for helping to write that report if I outline, if I outline it and we collect all the data and maybe we could just schedule a couple sessions as a working group. Would you be willing, Joe, to help with that? We could just gather everything and sit down and you're saying no. It's okay. You can say
I'm
no.
not gonna commit it at this time.
That's okay.
I think Leslie would be happy to do that, but we can't ask her to seek out the data. We need to get to them.
The way I could see it working is that I would create an outline, bring it back to the big committee. You would say yay or nay, or you left something out. And then gather all the data from all the different committees in my office. And then hopefully there is a volunteer who could rough out some of this, with me. And then the goal would be, when did we say that we should have this done by? Did I say November, December, somewhere in
I thought you said
there?
November.
Yeah, I think November, holidays, whatnot, December. I think just to keep it moving apace also. And then we don't know, there's no guarantee that the mayor would form a building committee enough to get it to city council to be appointed right by the beginning of January. It could happen in February, we don't know, but at least we would be ready.
Depends how well our YouTube thing goes.
Okay, set agenda for next meeting. Same thing. Hopefully more information comes forward in the sense of the groups. That's my suggestion.
Sounds reasonable.
Set summer meeting dates. I can't do that right now for myself. Are there dates that we shouldn't do?
I might be having a big for oral surgery in July, which would mean that there's gonna be at least 2 weeks where I can't even talk. So I was,
2 weeks now, I can't.
Let's
even.
schedule a meeting during that 2 weeks. Just kidding. To me, I think personally, we've stuck to, with some exceptions, we've stuck to the second Tuesday of the month. The only, and I don't think we can afford a loss of time like we do on the senior center board. We don't meet in July and August. I don't think we can afford to do that. So
Yeah, you already have the dates in here.
personally, I would stick with the second Tuesday of the month. And if
If
some,
we have to change it, we do.
or
yeah.
some people, 1 or 2 people can't make it because of vacation or surgery or what, so be it.
Yeah.
But you stick with that date and hopefully you get, and if someone is reporting in on a committee, they can give that report to someone else to report it in.
And if you're in another part of the world, it is a Google Meet link.
Yeah.
Right.
If you
I'll
wanna-
be in Alaska next month. I'm not Google meeting you.
Yeah, get your priorities straight, Pat.
but, in terms of advanced planning for a future meeting, for example, if we wanted to have a presentation from, say, a senior center designer or another senior center or something, we can do those things here within this committee. So if people have an interest in that, I just want to plan it out ahead of time. Like I know that the people who did our building feasibility study, who also designed Hadley, they're willing to have a chat with us just about general principles of design and, you know, what they learned from our building and other area buildings. They could come chat with us for 20 minutes or something. So just, you know, if people have an idea, bring it to the next meeting because I'll need to schedule that in advance.
Jane. They never,
Oh,
So,
she's
yeah.
great.
I think the other thing we had said that when we were originally talking about meeting, there was some discussion about 2 meetings a month. And then we said, let's stick with one, the second Tuesday of the month. And if need be, we could schedule a second one. So we could always do that if we had to. If a person making a presentation could only make it on a certain date, we could schedule another meeting if we had to.
And we use the hour, since this room is from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., we use the hour before this meeting met to have our subcommittee meeting so that we were all here.
Yeah, so people are free to do that. You're free to have your subcommittee meetings here at either 11 or 1.
Pat, what time's the Brass Cat open?
how come Pat knows?
No comment.
There's no other
No other.
motion to adjourn.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second. Roll call, Tom.
Yay.
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 Yep,
Pat.
Yay. Yay.
we're done.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.